What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. Excuse Amy this week. She's feeling a little bit under the weather. She's being a trooper and chilling out here with us, so
sorry,
excuse
guys.
her sore throat and coughing, but we will get through this. We'll all get through it together, and it'll be okay. But we just wanted to let you guys know that before we get started. So this week we are here talking about the Tyrants story. It is the second story in the, you can't really call it a block of stories, but the conspiracy grouping of stories. The Conspiracy Take the Crown, or Conspiracy 2 group of stories called Tyrants. So we knew leading in that Brago was the king at the start of Conspiracy 2, or at the end of Conspiracy 1, and that then in the preview leading up to this, we knew that he was killed. Last week we met Kaya Ghost Assassin, and we found out a little bit about her, and then this week we finally see the culmination and the moment that Kaya kills Brago. Yeah. Now, I suspected that this week's story would not be told from Kaya's perspective because I assumed that they wouldn't give us 2 weeks in a row of the same perspective in a story, because I don't know that they've done that yet or since or whatever. But I wasn't sure from whose perspective they would tell it from, because if they told it from Brago's, it would be a very quick story, because he would then just be dead again.
Hi,
and then
I'm a spirit dude.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm the king. Hi, I'm dead.
Yeah, and then it would just be over.
Well, I was dead to begin with, so whatever.
But if it was told from Marchesa's perspective, I knew that that wouldn't make sense either, because I doubted that she would have been there when Kaya killed Brago. So what they did was they did a really good job, and I know we usually don't say it in the video itself, but I did notice that Alison Lures was the person who at least presented this story. Presumably also wrote it. I don't know exactly how that works, because I know it's like a cumulative thing, but she was listed as the author. So Alison Lures did this story, and I think just overall did a really good job.
Yeah.
Again, we talk about the fact that, you know, with Conspiracy and Eternal Masters, they are kind of supplemental product, and so it's not the main story. And with the Eternal Masters stories that we've already reviewed, they were filler. You know, they were just there, and they were good, don't get me wrong, but they were still just there. They didn't impact anything, where today it doesn't matter whether you remember those stories or not, unless you're a person who enjoys stories, and then, you know, you can be like, oh, that reminds me of that thing that happened there. But
you as a person just particularly care about Eternal Masters and pretty much nothing else.
Right.
Which, you know, is a possibility, I guess.
It's totally possible. It's just, you know, or maybe you have nostalgia for Prodigal Sorcerer or Ancestral Mask, and so you are happy to hear about those stories, and that's fine. All I'm saying, and I think all we're saying, is that at the end of the day, we're not going to be referencing back to those stories at any time as having impact on any future stories of any kind. That's the only thing that we're saying.
And no one would expect us to.
Right, exactly. It's just, you know, they put a story out, they have one out every week, and those were those stories for those weeks to kind of hold us over until Eldritch Moon started, and now we have these conspiracy stories to hold us over until Kaladesh starts, but these may be more impactful because you are going to, you know, we know next week there's even more conspiracy story, and it's going to be seemingly focused on Marchesa, and from Marchesa's perspective, because this story, I didn't mention it, this story was told from Adriana's perspective, who was the captain of the guard for Brago, and then kept her position, at least for a little while, as the captain of Marchesa's group as well.
Or kept her position reluctantly.
Very reluctantly.
Begrudgingly.
Yes, but then, you know, we kind of got to see that awesome interaction between Marchesa and Adriana, where Adriana was like this strong presence, where she was like, you conspired to kill my king, and I want to kill you, but I can't because I'm under your employ, and that would be a bad thing. But don't forget, lady, you may be the queen and you may feel super powerful, but if you kill me, you're going to get what's yours too. And Marchesa's response was, yeah, you're right. I know that you're right. I'm not going to kill you, but, you know, just realize that I'm going to make your life...
I'll chill over here if you chill over there.
And she basically, I'm going to make your life a living hell, deal with it. You know, realize it and deal with it. And instead, she left, and she went to another familiar face in Selvala. who again is someone from original Conspiracy. So we've got Brago coming back, at least in this story. We have Brago back, we have Marchesa back, and we have now Selvala as well. So a lot of familiar faces.
Really cool for me because I don't know anything about Conspiracy story-wise.
Right.
So it's interesting to me to sort of meet these new characters, and it's interesting to him to call back those older characters.
Right. And I will say, speaking of callbacks, if you missed last week's episode, it was either annotated at the beginning or is now up there now, and you should definitely go click it and take a look from us, because we talked about last week's episode. That's not just a shameless plug, but it's also to talk about the fact that we discussed last week, one of the I don't even know that I could necessarily call it a problem, but just I think a misstep, in my personal opinion, with last week's story was they put in a lot of random card arts from cards that had nothing to do with this story. They just tangentially were related to things that were happening in the story, but they didn't fit perfectly.
They sort of depicted something that was similar.
Right.
But
and
like in the actual wordage, it would describe something, and you'd be like, okay, but that picture isn't actually
right.
what you're describing. It's just sort of related.
Yeah. And as Amy put it last week, it really seemed to be, well, we put pictures in all the other stories, so we're putting pictures in these stories.
Well, okay, people expect this now, so just throw them in.
And it felt very out of place. Now, I will also go along with what Amy said last week and agree that the pictures of Kaya were cool.
Yeah. Because
that is new art and expressly related to the story. I mean, it just flat out was there.
Yeah, it was new art for the story. I mean...
Right. And in this week's story, the only art that was there was new art. And again, I've said this in the past, that's to my knowledge, it was all new art. If for whatever reason, like, obviously I know that the picture of Kaya stabbing Brago is not technically new because we saw it in the preview for Conspiracy 2, but what I mean is the art that was shown was all for this story.
Oh, okay.
It all depicted stuff. Because
when I saw the one picture and I was like, oh, I don't know who that is. And he goes, well, I do, because she was from Conspiracy.
Selvala, no.
And I was like, okay, well, maybe that's just a card.
No,
and the picture is just a card from Conspiracy.
Right, and it's not because I knew the picture, it was because underneath it then said Selvala.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, oh, cool, it's Selvala, the elf lady. So was
the art new or wasn't it?
What do you mean? The art, that art looked new to me, and again, it did not have a name of a card that you could put your mouse over and the card would appear. So it just to give you that kind of background, all of the art seemed new here, which is great. I appreciated that greatly, and there were still a good 4 or 5 pictures in this story, and that's all you needed. And also kind of like what we talked about last week, Kaya as a character was spoiled, but her card was not. But what I said was that I suspected, because we were going into this week's story and we knew it was coming, that maybe Kaya would be spoiled, her card would be spoiled in this story. And guess what? Halfway through, or a quarter of the way through the story, Kaya Ghost Assassin's right there. And if you're not reading the stories, you wouldn't have seen that. I mean, you would have, because a lot of people who do read the stories then covered it and they put it on their YouTube channels and things like that. So that's totally fine. I don't
see the spoilers of the picture, maybe.
Right.
But...
And I'm a Vorthos player more than anything else.
Most likely be a small version of the picture. Even if you enlarged it, it would probably be a lot smaller than what we saw.
Right.
So.
And
and the thing with this art is that it's so great to see it enlarged, because you really get to see the detail that they put so much hard work into making, and that you don't really get to see in the card itself.
Right. Yeah, it's true, and a lot of times with the larger picture, you see more detail, or you see you'll see more of the picture sometimes as well, where it would be something that was at the bottom of the picture. The example I always use is Hanweir the Writhing Township. It had a little boy in there. On the card itself, even the giant card that it is, you still don't technically see... You kind of see him behind, like, the text box, but in the full actual picture from the story, you see the little boy.
Right.
And it's awesome. Like, that was really cool. So, there's that.
The other thing is, like, from Innistrad, a lot of the pictures on the cards were very dark.
Yes.
In Innistrad way. But in the stories, they were brightened or contrasted a little bit more.
Right.
So, or maybe it just looked that way because they were larger. It made it easier to see. But whatever the case, you know, you could tell more the beauty of the picture in a bigger size than you could on the card.
True. Very, very true. And I was trying to say a little bit, and it's really not that pertinent, but I will say that I'm a Vorthos player more than anything else. I'm a limited player, which is technically what Conspiracy is, right? It's a super fun multiplayer limited format, but at the same time, I don't necessarily feel super confident discussing my opinions on Kaya yet. If I get to use her and then I have an occasion to talk about it, maybe I will, but otherwise there are many other people who will be discussing her power level, her impact in Legacy and Vintage and things like that, if she even has one, because those are the legal formats that she will be able to be used in, but I'm not that guy. We're here to talk about the story. We're here to talk about the art, Vorthos Pride, hashtag Vorthos Pride and all that. So,
yeah.
But regardless, this story was very interesting, and it was great to see. Like I said, I think my favorite part of the story was the interaction between Adriana and Marchesa at that one point. And you also got to see a little bit into Adriana's personality, where she was like, yeah, Brago is a tyrant. Like, I work for him, but he's a tyrant. And do I feel bad? Would I have taken the bribe if it was offered to me? Because it's seemingly, I mean, this was crazy even to me before she mentioned it in the story, but everybody seemed to be in on this assassination.
Yeah.
Speaking. Everybody. I mean, the other ghosts or spirits, the servants, all of the servants, everybody, and to the point
they
where
were gung ho to kill off this ghost,
and like even before Kaya had killed him, they were like destroying all of his dinnerware and stuff, and like Adriana came in and she's like, "What are you doing?" And they're like, "Oh well, he doesn't like, or she doesn't like this," and she's like, "She who? You know, Her Majesty what? Like that? We have a king. Her is not the right word." And
this ancient ghost can't be taking a wife all of a sudden.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I thought was kind of funny was when the servant was kind of throwing the dishes down the garbage chute. At least it seemed like the garbage chute. She said, or the servant said to Adriana, "Yeah, I'm throwing these away because Her Majesty doesn't like them and she wanted to get rid of them." And Adriana's like, "Who are you talking about? Who's Her Majesty?" And the servant's like, "Well, I'm not supposed to tell you I'm not supposed to even tell you that she wanted me to do this." I'm like, "But you just did."
Right.
Like, she wasn't holding a knife or a sword to you or anything. She asked a question. And you were just like, "Oh, it's this. But I'm not supposed to tell you that."
Oops.
Well, you just did. Like, that's so weird. So I don't fully understand. I don't fully understand why she did that. But that's fine. Like, whatever her motivations were. So there was that.
I think it was just to show that she was not in on it, whereas the rest of the servants and everybody else who dealt with the castle, just the typical day-to-day like procedures of the castle were in on basically the assassination of their king.
Yes, and it really did show like the whole idea of the fact that, yes, Adriana, you are correct. He is a tyrant. No one likes him.
Right.
You know, they were more than willing. It wasn't, "Oh, well, she had enough money to make it worth my while." Like, no, they didn't like him to begin with. And because going into this story, I was like, how are they going to take Brago, who seems to be such a cool character, right? He was just reprinted in Eternal Masters. Like, he was in Conspiracy. A lot of people liked him as a card, right? A lot of people liked him as a card. How are you going to take him and make him not good? Like, how are you going to make Kaya, who is a character that we all, I don't want to say fell in love with, but we were introduced to and we learned about her motives and we liked her in the last story last week, and now she's going to kill off Brago. And does that mean she's a bad guy? Is she a good guy? A lot of times, and we've had this discussion where Amy corrects me, there's a gray area, that's a thing. And I am the kind of guy who's like, tell me who I should like. You know, like, tell me these things.
Yeah,
and
that's No.
Amy's more than willing to,
That's the opposite for me. If you're gonna tell me who I should like, I'm gonna like the other guy. That's pretty much my story.
Yeah, Amy's more than willing to, formulate her own opinions and stuff, as opposed to just, taking it in however they want you to take it in. But no, obviously it's totally fine.
It's just that I tend to like the villains a little bit more, especially when they're in that sort of gray area between there's some days you can't tell if they're evil or not. Because to me, that's a dynamic character. Mm-hmm. That's realistic. That's a human being. Mm-hmm. Because nobody is perfect or just fully evil. That's not a thing. Well, so, maybe you just like the sort of whimsy of storytelling enough that you like characters to be more polarized.
That's fair.
But I'm the opposite. I like it to be more real.
Relatable. I do also have to say that I really appreciated when we were doing the Eldritch Moon story, and again, yes, shameless plug, all of those stories, we reviewed all of Shadows over Innistrad, all of Eldritch Moon. You can check out the whole playlist of all that. I'll link that somewhere, presumably right here. But anyway, we talked about all that stuff, and during that story, I talked about the fact that you're going from Battle for Zendikar, right? And in Battle for Zendikar block, you had Ulamog and you had Kozilek. Yeah. And the whole plane was just being ruined by these titans. Mm-hmm. And then they were killed by the gathering of the Gatewatch, right? The Gatewatch came together, they took care of all these guys. You technically had Ob Nixilis thrown in there as well to just throw more of a monkey wrench into it. Then you go to Innistrad. And Innistrad, again, we've mentioned this many times, but Innistrad had werewolves and zombies and vampires and all...
Oh my.
Yes, and then they had evil angels as well. Avacyn turned on them, and their only savior turned on them. And technically...
The one thing that protected them from all these other evil things. And then kind of switched.
Yes,
almost.
And then technically...
Because then they had to fight against the angels to protect the plane itself.
Yes. And the angels, and then technically Nahiri as well. Now, while she didn't necessarily care as much about the individual humans on Innistrad, or even the werewolves, etc.
Right, she didn't give a shit.
She cared about Avacyn, and she cared about Sorin.
Right.
Because Avacyn was of Sorin, and she knew that, and she had a grudge against the two of them. So she was the villain at that part as well. And then Emrakul comes in Eldritch Moon. So you have these huge, super powerful enemies. And the one thing that I really enjoy is, one of the things that I believe I said it, I may be wrong, but I believe I said going into it that Kaladesh is coming up. How are you going to go from giant Eldrazi titans that can literally drink planes of existence and ruin them, and go to Kaladesh where it's like, oh, there are some thopters. They fly around. And yet, again, I don't think that they won't be able to do it, but one of the things that I was saying was maybe it would be like a political intrigue kind of a set.
Which I think would be cool.
We're currently reading the political intrigue stories.
Yeah.
Think about it. There was just regicide. The story ended with, at least this week, with, hey, we're going to put you in as a senator, and we're going to turn this monarchy into a republic.
Right.
That's the definition of a political intrigue type of a story. You have assassination. Sure, it happens. And it's of a ghost, which is cool.
I feel like it's pretty apropos right now.
But it's
politically speaking, just... Sorry.
I told you she's not feeling too well. But no, you're right though. It's very, I think it's very appropriate, and I think that it's very cool, and it really does show like, hey, we just came off of Eldritch Moon, right? Emrakul was just imprisoned in the moon. Liliana took her oath. Now, this story has nothing at all to do with the Gatewatch. At all. It just doesn't. Kaladesh will, presumably. I mean, I'm almost certain of that. But they haven't shown us how yet. And I'm waiting for that transitionary story where we find out why one or all of them go to Kaladesh. I would assume
I'm not waiting for that because I like to see what comes before it.
Well, and I would assume it would be Chandra, right? Because Kaladesh is her homeworld, so maybe, but
Yeah.
we'll see, right? I'm like you said, I am willing to wait. That's fine. I am liking where we are now. It's just I like to talk about what's coming next and stuff like
Right.
that. But so for this story, we're done for this week. But if you look down below, there's still some more time on that timestamp, right? So what else are we going to be talking about? Well, for those of you that may not know, and if you don't know who Mark Rosewater is, and you're watching this video,
Do your research, dude.
not even do your research. You're doing it wrong.
Right.
You should know Mark
Like,
Rosewater
come
before
on.
you know who Joe and Amy are.
Figure it out.
But regardless, Mark Rosewater is the guy, the figurehead for Magic the Gathering. He's worked there forever, 20 years now, and he does many articles and many, podcasts and things like that about Magic. And one of the columns that he's been doing recently, I believe it's in accordance with his Making Magic article column, but he's been doing something called Eldritch Moon Odds and Ends. And he had 3 different parts to it, and we just finished reading the 3rd part this week.
Yes.
We read the first 2 last week, amongst ourselves, and we wanted to kind of review that a little bit as well, because it was amazing. I think it's an amazing
Yes.
opportunity that Mark Rosewater gave the fans a chance to ask him questions, and that he answered them. And there were none, not that I think that he would be, but he was never rude, right? He was never like, this is a stupid question, He took all of these people's questions into consideration, and he answered them, and he answered them kind of speaking for an entire company.
Yeah.
Which-
I like how thoroughly he answered the questions.
Yes.
It wasn't just, okay, well, this is kind of what our mindset was at the time.
Yeah.
He really broke down the steps that they went through to get to that point, so
Yes.
that the reader could actually understand what the heck he was even talking about.
Yes. But what I appreciated, because again, he talked about mechanics, and he talked about why certain mechanics were chosen, why certain mechanics won't. He talked about the 2-block system and the change from the 3-block to the 3-set block to the 2-set block. He talked about that, right? And those things were very interesting, but we're here, well, not for Amy, right? Amy's more of a Vorthos. She appreciates the art. She appreciates the stories. I also play the game. Again, it's more limited than anything else, but...
Well, to me, the 3rd article was by far the best.
Right.
And I have to say, I'm so glad we read that. Like, after we read the first one, and after we read the second one, I was like, okay, well, that was cool.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
After reading this one, I'm like, oh, thank God we read these, because... I know so much more about not just Eldritch Moon, but about the process at Wizards.
Yes, 100%. And that's why I wanted to talk about it, right? Because if we had read it and it wouldn't have been that pertinent, then we were like, okay, well, we didn't really waste our time because we enjoyed ourselves, but we won't talk about it on the show. Well, I wanted to talk about it mainly because of the fact that we're here talking about the stories, and we critique the stories both thematically and storyline-wise for the characters and maybe plot holes or whatever, but we also talk about the fact that it's a story for a card game. It's a story based on a card game, and there are a lot of times where we will stand here and say, it doesn't make sense. Why was this card not in this set, right? The character was talked about in the story, why wasn't the card there? Or why wasn't, we talked about Arlen Cord a lot, and we were like, why was Arlen Cord in Shadows? She should have been in Eldritch Moon because she was really introduced in Eldritch Moon. We saw her for like 5 seconds in Shadows, so what was the purpose of it? And I guess spoilers? Definitely go read the articles.
Yes, go read the article.
They're definitely worth your time. If you are, pressed for time, only go read the 3rd one because we think it was the best, but definitely read all 3. It gives you context.
It was the best by far.
Yes, yes.
It's very helpful and detailed.
Yes. And I believe it was either the 1st or the 2nd article, Mark Rosewater talked about the fact that Arlen Cord was a consideration. There were 6 planeswalkers instead of 5, which there are supposed to be 5, but they did they needed a green planeswalker, and they didn't think that they couldn't find a planeswalker that was just green.
Yeah.
That would have worked as just a green planeswalker. And they thought about Tameo, and I think I forget what he said in terms of who he was trying to justify being green as well to get that 5th color in there. And so instead he bumped Arlen Cord from Eldritch Moon to Shadows to kind of cover that space. and made her red-green. The same, and what we had said when we were reviewing the Shadows story was, my guess was that she wasn't in Eldritch Moon because either I had said originally that the transform mechanic just wouldn't be in Eldritch Moon, but it turns out it was, but it was in a very different way. It wasn't there in the same way because it was really the creatures, the people and or the animals or whatever, transforming into Eldrazi and or melding into something else. And yet, he mentioned in this week, which made perfect sense to me and it helped clear it up, he mentioned that Ulrich, or Ulrich, or however you pronounce it, I'm going to say Ulrich.
I think
Ulrich was also supposed to be in Shadows, but they could not, and this makes perfect sense, they could not justify 2 mythic transforming or flipping werewolves. That makes perfect sense.
Right.
Why would you have 2 of them in the same set, right? And not even just mythic, specifically red-green mythic flip transforming werewolves.
Right.
It's too much, right? And especially in the mythic slot, you want more variation than that because, as we mentioned and as he mentioned, they're also producing a game, right? It's a story, and the stories are great, but it's also a game.
Right. And they still have to make the story make sense as it can make sense, as well as the game being playable.
Right.
They can't just cater to the story entirely and then lose out on the game being what it needs to be, playability wise.
Yes.
Because that would have everybody up in arms.
Yes.
And they can't do the opposite and just cater to what the game needs and then just let the story end up sort of piecey and weird and not cohesive and, and anything that makes sense.
Right.
They have to find the happy medium there where they can compromise, okay, well, we introduce Arlen Cord here, but you don't really learn very much about her till later, even though we have her in this set and not in this one.
Right.
They still catered to it enough. They were still like, okay, well, we can splash her in the beginning because that's the set that the card's going to be in.
Right.
Realizing that, okay, well, we'll get their feet wet and then they can learn more about her later.
Yeah.
And it'll still be fine because, we can't just put her card in that set for the sake of the story because it doesn't work for playability.
Yeah. And he even said that no matter which way they put it, it wouldn't be perfect. Right? If they had put Ulrich in Shadows and Arlen in Eldritch, it would still be weird, and especially because then you'd kind of have Arlen and Tamio and Liliana in the smaller secondary set, which is weird. No, it doesn't. So what they ended up doing was they did 4 and 2 instead of 3 and 3, which again, larger set followed by smaller set, it makes sense that there would be more Planeswalkers in the larger set. That
and
just
not
makes
only
sense.
that, but it also, that might be the format that they're now going to follow.
He said that they will be sticking to 5. It will
Okay.
always be 5 Planeswalkers, but it could still be 3 and 2. Right? 3 in the larger set, 2 in the smaller set. And that makes perfect sense. But yes, he said that 6 was the exception to the rule, not the new rule.
No, but what I'm saying is, they're not going to probably put more Planeswalkers in the smaller set and less in the larger set.
No, I would imagine not. Right, exactly. And so
that doesn't make sense for their new format
Right.
that they're doing it in.
And the second thing I wanted to talk about, for those of you that, again, have been watching JAR all the way through, first of all, whether this is your first JAR or whether you've been watching all the way through, thank you so much, as always, for watching, because thank you. This is great. We really enjoy making it, even when we're super sick. And, again, being a trooper, holding out, give her some love in the comments.
My cough syrup started to wear off about halfway through this video.
And you've been talking a lot, which is great, because, we're sharing our opinions and giving a review. But one of the other main things that I wanted to talk about from this story, and that I gleaned from it and learned from it, and something that I've been talking about kind of a lot, is somebody asked the question why Hal and Elena did not get their own card.
Yeah.
And Mark, without even knowing me, because I've been talking about this for weeks.
Right.
Mark talked about and made that akin to Gisa and Geralf. And that's perfect, because that's Gisa and Geralf. I've been talking about that for weeks. If you're new here, I've been talking about that for weeks. And it really is because Gisa and Geralf are so cool. I loved their story.
Yeah.
Their story that we all, it was us and our friends who we were with at the time.
And it's not just that their story is cool, their relationship is cool.
Oh, it's amazing. It's fantastic. And that's what I love. That's what I really appreciate seeing, which is why anytime the Gatewatch are interacting with one another, or I guess now technically Liliana's in the Gatewatch, but when the members of the Gatewatch were interacting with Liliana, I loved that. I loved that exchange between them, because it was always so snarky and so sarcastic, but it was still serious.
Unless it's not.
Well, yes, it was still...
You can really get a true feel for what each character is like from that.
Oh, yeah. And you... Right. And you can see kind of where it's going and how they feel about one another. And one thing that Mark Rosewater said, which I loved, was somebody asked... Like I said, they asked about Hal and Elena, and his response was... Look, the reason that Hal and Elena did not have a card in this set, even though people loved them and even though people wanted to hear about them, because they were in two different stories. They were in their own story, which was the first story overall, where Arlen Cord was introduced at the end. They were in the first story overall for Shadows, first story that we did in JaAR, episode 1, we talked about them. But then... you had them in the kind of the piecemeal story where they talked about all the different B characters, and you get to see where all of them went in that one collaborative story, which was also a great story. But the reason that they weren't cards is because those characters of Hal and Elena weren't technically written or made at all until after the set was finished.
Right.
And that's why he specifically said, that's why characters like Gisa and Geralf have never been introduced before. This is the first time that Gisa and Geralf have had their own cards. Now, clearly there's been Geralf's Masterpiece and Prized Amalgam had Geralf on it and stuff, and that's because they are written, as he put it, when the flavor text is written on the cards, and when the stories are written, which is after the fact. So the flavor text is what creates those characters. And the love for those characters.
Right. And so then the story gets made sort of around that to build upon it.
But it seems like, especially from what he was saying in these articles, that is not going to be the case going forward.
Right.
If they introduce characters to us... and they think that those characters are important enough, those characters should have their own cards. And I kept saying, why are Gisa and Geralf in Eldritch Moon? They were in Shadows, and they didn't even have a story in Eldritch Moon. I wanted to find out how they got back together so badly, because I loved that original interaction between them. As I was saying, we, with our friends, reviewed that story, and you can check that out. But... It was so much fun reading that story, and it was so cool seeing their interactions with one another, because I love that. And then you get to see an actual card with them on it, and you get flavor text on that card that is amazing. Yeah. And you get flavor text on other cards in this set, or in Eldritch Moon, that were amazing. And it showed the two of them interacting with one another. And... that flavor text is what told the story. And I wanted more because I loved it so much, but the only reason, at least, I don't want to say the only reason, but the main reason, as Mark Rosewater put it, that Gisa and Geralf were in this set is because so many people enjoyed them from Innistrad, but they were written after the cards were already made, and so they couldn't be an original Innistrad, and so this was a way of, hey, we're back on Innistrad, here's that Gisa and Geralf card you guys wanted. And so it gave it to us after the fact, and after Shadows. And sure, if they thematically, as a mythic, fit into Eldritch Moon as opposed to into Shadows over Innistrad, I get it. It makes sense, and I really, really appreciated having that question answered, because those are questions that I've been, the Arlen Cord question and the Gisa and Geralf question.
Man. My ear has been falling off.
And so have all of yours if you've been watching. So thank you for bearing with me. I am super happy that it all came together for me to have found out the answer to that question, or those questions, because it really was something that I cared about. You know, I wasn't doing it to be annoying. I wanted to know. And again, I'm glad that those questions could get answered. And I don't know the people's names who asked those questions, but clearly I'm not the only one who was asking. And so thank you to those people who asked those questions. I'm sure that you are just as happy as I am to have your question answered. And again, then thank you to Mark Rosewater for taking the time to answer those questions. And it really felt like in this article, in part 3, he was answering them kind of rapid fire, because they were like, I felt like, and maybe I'm wrong because I didn't count them up, but it felt like he answered many more questions in article 3 than in 1 or 2. It just felt that way. But
I think he just did it in sort of a more conversational manner in the first 2. I think the third one, he just got to the point. He focused on the question and just answered it in a complete way, in a detailed way.
Yes, absolutely.
But not with any extra fluff.
Yes.
He just got right to it.
And yet still had time to make a joke, right? There was a question in there about hats. Again, if you haven't read the article, go read it.
Yeah.
But that one was funny, and and he took the time to answer the hats question, even though he was, as you said, being so detailed and so methodical of properly and concisely, that's the word I was looking for, and concisely answering all of these questions to their fullest. So.
And I actually thought that the hat question was kind of ironic. Because, you know, Mercury in hats makes you go crazy.
It's true. It's true. I hadn't even thought of that. Yep.
You know, all of those madness creatures maybe needed to not have hats so that you would know it wasn't from the Mercury, it was from Emrakul.
So it was awesome. It was great. Again, thank you to Mark Rosewater. Thank you to Allison Lures for writing this week's conspiracy story. And thank you
to Wizards, too, because obviously that means that, you know, they're catering to the customer.
Oh,
they're
sorry, go ahead.
Their new way of doing things is incorporating Vorthos so much more, which is something that we obviously appreciate as Vorthos players, or, you know, just people who are interested in the stories. But that'll enhance the process and the game.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully it'll round out their customer base a little bit more, and it'll make their existing customer base more rounded out with their product.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, hopefully it'll make players who never cared about the story before care about it now.
Yeah. And I wanted to give one final shout out to Mark Rosewater for something else that he said. Going back to Hal and Elena, something that we have talked about on this channel is Wizards' push for inclusion, or push further into inclusion of both characters in their stories and players in their game. And they've been doing an amazing job. Hal and Elena are a same-sex female couple, which just, again, it wasn't out of fear. You know, we talked about that in the first episode. They did it, right? They made those characters, and that the fact that they were a same-sex female couple was not their story. They did a million other things, and it was just like a sentence in there was to let you know that they were together, and that was about it. And otherwise, they just showed you who they were, because that's how people do things, right? It just made sense. It wasn't in there to be like, see these, you know, underserved communities, like, we love you. Yeah. It wasn't, it didn't seem like pandering.
Right.
And what Mark Rosewater said,
it also wasn't like, oh, a shock factor.
Yeah.
It was it was understated, like people are.
Yeah.
Their sexuality isn't the only thing that makes them who they are. So
Correct. Or their gender, right? Because it was also the fact that they were females, and we've had that discussion many times as well. But it was amazing, and the fact that he specified, like, look, you know, Gisa and Geralf were characters that weren't in original Innistrad. We put them here. Hal and Elena, because people want them so badly, we hear you, and we will try to find a way to get them in there. And then he added in at the end, just in case people didn't get it, that, you know, it had nothing to do with who they were as characters. It was just that they were written after the fact. And I think, I genuinely hope that there is not a person out there who's like, well, he didn't include them because they're women, or they didn't include them because they're women, or because they're a same-sex couple. It's because they were written after the fact, and that makes perfect sense. And so that's great. And the fact that people enjoyed them so much that maybe they'll be put into a future set, maybe when we returning to Innistrad, which hopefully is way far off, but maybe we'll see Hal and Elena then, and it'll be Wizards' way of bringing it all back together and saying, see, we know, we heard you, we know you care, and we care too, and here they are. Right. So, props to that. I mean, the article was just fantastic, so thank you again for that. I think that was great. Yeah. I think that we are all set.
Yeah, I think
so. I'm going to let this one get back to getting some more cough syrup for herself. I'm going to go as well. But we will be back next week, hopefully with a little bit of a shorter one. It was shorter last week. Maybe it'll be shorter next week, so we can bookend this big one, because this was kind of a long one. But I think it was things that were really important to talk about.
Yeah, I think there was a lot to talk about for this one.
Yes, and I think it was so that when we get back into the swing of Kaladesh, we don't have to do all this cleanup stuff that is still pertinent, but we could do it on a week where it's the stories are shorter.
On Kaladesh.
Right, exactly. So we'll see how that all goes. We thank you guys, as always, for watching, sticking with us throughout this whole video. If you watched this long, thank you.
Yes.
If you are new, welcome. If you are a returner, welcome back. Thank you again, as we said, for watching. Please let us know in the comments what you thought. You can check us out on Facebook and Twitter. Let us know what you thought there as well. Subscribe down below. We will be opening Conspiracy product on the channel. I think if you're going to, honestly, this is a sincere question. If you are going to be offended that I'm opening Conspiracy product and not drafting with it, let me know, and maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just play in some drafts and show you guys what I got in those drafts instead of opening a box. But I'm going to open a box for myself regardless, so just let me know whether you want to see it or whether you don't, because some people are like, don't, it's a limited format, don't open it. Let me know. I'm going to open one regardless. I will most likely do it on camera, but if you have a strong aversion to that, let us know in the comments again, or on Facebook and Twitter.
Because we listen to your opinions.
We do. I do want to hear what you guys...
I say that like every one of these episodes.
It's true, though. We definitely read all the comments and the discussions that you all have with one another. And
yeah, if you want to talk to us, leave it in the comments. Yeah. Yes, we'll see it.
Yeah, we totally will.
And if you want to talk to each other, leave it in the comments. Yeah. Because then you guys will see it.
Yeah, exactly.
And we'll see it too, so we can even weigh in if, that's something to do.
And again, next week it looks like we're talking about Marchesa. So again, for Conspiracy openings for Marchesa's story, subscribe down below. You will find out when those videos come out. From the Geek for All YouTube channel, I've been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.